you really are an enthusiast in the purest sense. Thank you. Oh shit, I didn't say that.
This is as natural as it gets. Probably end up being a taxi driver to justify the value that I've spent on something that I love. I made him an offer which was probably one that I reckon would have genuinely got me in trouble with my wife.
Today we're having dinner with Dave, discussing all things car collecting and finding out how a lifelong enthusiast could claim to love his family SUV as much as his Italian supercar. We're going to ask you about that comment soon, but before we do, I just want to give some context. A lot of people claim to be passionate about cars, but you really are an enthusiast in the purest sense of that word. How many cars have you owned?
Yeah, that's a good one. I actually, I know how many I've had. A lot. And I've actually, I've kept a spreadsheet. I did for a while. So for a long time I was like, you know, trying to keep track of what I was buying and spending and, you know, on cars. And I was like, I better just keep my eye on this because sometimes I lose money on cars. You don't always win on them, right? Especially when passion's involved. 64 is the number. 64 on a spreadsheet. I actually stopped putting the numbers in after a while because I just didn't want to see it anymore. Yeah, a bit of a wasted youth, but yeah.
And how many right now?
If I exclude daily drivers, probably about 4 collectible cars. I've had up to about 7 or 8 at one time, yeah, it's been a lifelong passion for me, to be honest, and I just can't get it out of my system. It seems to the I guess I don't know, to the curiosity of my whole family.
And what is it about cars that you love, and when did it start?
It actually all started when I was a kid. I actually used to sit at my parents' front fence and just literally watch cars go up and down and just try and guess what model they were. I just loved the way they looked. I loved the shape, I loved the sound. Just everything about them just intrigued me. And most of all, and probably as I got older, I just loved where they could take you, the journey they could take you on. That's always intrigued me. You know what I mean? Like the whole journey. So yeah, when I was a kid, I had a whole family. Like the whole family was sort of working in a car-related industry at some point. I've managed to avoid that pretty much.
Maybe why you still love them.
Yeah, probably why I still love them. I've never looked at them as something to make money on, or it's always been a real passion for me. You know, as a kid, played with Matchbox cars and watched all the TV shows, Knight Rider, Dukes of Hazzard. I sometimes indulge in one of those episodes every so often, you know, just to be nostalgic.
Well, the reason I described you as a true enthusiast earlier is because you've owned everything. Australian muscle, Italian supercars, classic luxury, hot hatches, Japanese icons. But there seems to be a trend towards classic and unrestored cars.
Yeah.
What is it about old cars for you?
You're right, actually. I've always loved the older cars. And for me, I've always enjoyed the simplicity of an old car. They've always felt more analog to me. They always feel like you've got a real direct connection when you're driving, you know? You know, have you sort of heard like when you go on holiday, half the fun is getting there? Well, for me, a lot of it is just the process of driving. I like the interaction. I like that one-to-one feel. When a car's older, it's obviously simpler, it's more basic. And it just you just have a direct feel, where a new car it's quite digitized, it's very homogenized for me. It's very...
They're all the same a bit.
Well, the car sort of feels like look, as a daily car, fantastic, all the conveniences are great. In fact, sometimes when I drive on my older cars, I think to myself, how do people back in the day actually ever live with these things, like every day? You know, it can test your patience. But the involvement in operating an old car, especially an old school unrestored car that's just as it was the day it came out, to me, it's got a certain sense of magic because it's imperfect. And you can't really ever get that with a modern car anymore because modern cars are just too perfect.
It's funny you say that because, like, for me, even though we're in cars, watches are my kind of passion. And it's amazing. There's a big thing in the watch world which says you'll pay $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 for a watch to be only just off by this much. But a $15 quartz like Japanese built watch will be perfect all the time forever.
Yep.
But there's just some beauty to the, the idea of this mechanical thing getting as close as it can to perfection, which is almost unattainable, really, for something mechanical. I'm saying digital can be perfect. Let's be honest.
100%. And like I said, with the older stuff, the analog stuff, and I've had a lot of old classic cars. For me, the fact that if you do break down, there's a good chance you're going to get yourself home because they're pretty simple and basic, right? New cars these days, let's face it, once there's a computer gremlin, it's a flatbed truck and you got to get rescued. It's almost that challenge in itself of sort of like a man and machine. Well, I say woman and machine also, but what I'm saying is I just enjoy that interaction with operating an old car. And the funny thing about an old car is if you have a good day or a bad day, it can really depend on you. Sometimes you can have both in the same day. Especially you start off with good intentions and then by the middle of it, you want to dump it on the side of the road because it gets too much. But the smells, the noises, they're not as well insulated. It's a different experience. And I've had newer cars, like modern muscle cars and they just don't have that little X factor. They're just a little bit too good at what they do.
Like, sorry to jump in there. Tell them about the smell of your Nissan that you had.
The appreciation for like a burning oil smell sitting in the cockpit.
It's like being around the campfire. Like you can tell when someone drove your car.
You're on and you get out of the car, you're just reeking of this oil.
I've had that plenty of times when I've gone out for a drive and then we've got a little fridge in the garage and I go out there to get a drink or something and I can still hear the car cooling down and the heat and metal, contracting after expanding and the tinking noises and the smell and it reminds me of my day. You know what I mean? It's like anything, like, a smell or a song sort of reminds you of something. Unfortunately, I got an affliction to just keep cars in the way of reminding me of great memories, It's not a cheap habit, but it's been enjoyable so far. I've been pretty lucky. I've never really owned too many lemons. But unrestored cars, like you're saying, Dean, I like unrestored because these days, especially like with older cars, there's a whole trend of just restoring and modernising cars to current technology. And I think that sort of art of the old cars, the way they were built, old acrylic enamels, the old mechanics, just yesteryear, that's like you lose that. And that's why an unrestored car can really tell you a story. And also, I like the battle scars. I like the story it tells. When you see a car that's sort of like looks perfect, like something that's showroom, I mean, it's fantastic to look at, but it doesn't tell you something. It doesn't tell you its history. It doesn't tell you, like, I've got an older car where it's got a few marks and I know battle scars. I know when that happened and it reminds me, oh yeah, that's right, that's when, what's her name, opened the door on something, or, you know what I mean, or this came off, or, this happened. Funnily enough, I remember once a fan blowing out and it put a crack in the paint, and I still have that crack there. And when I look at it, I always go, I remember that time I went for that drive, with my wife, and that happened, She wasn't that happy about it because it was sort of broken down, but, I look at it with fonder memories.
Obviously, new vehicles get faster and more technologically advanced. So what's the one element of a classic car that just can't be recreated in a modern car?
Yeah, so it's true. I recently had a car, a supercharged Mustang. It's over 700 horsepower, and it was absolutely crazy fast to drive, like hair-raising. And what I realised was, one, it's not really usable unless you use it on a track. So on the road, you can't drive that fast, and it's just irresponsible. But what I realised is I traded it for an older sports car, which was more analogue in feel. And I realised that I actually enjoyed driving a slower car faster than trying to drive a fast car slower, because a fast car it's quite limited in its appeal. Like, sometimes the fun's getting there, right? And that's the problem. I hear a lot of people that trade into like late model supercars and that, and they go, they're just so explosive and so fast that you drive these cars at 5/10, While an old car, you can really stretch it out and feel like you're getting into it. Yeah. But you're actually probably going as fast as probably a modern SUV that, mum and dad drop their kids off at school. I mean, that's the reality of it. Like, supercars from 20, 30 years ago are probably slower than a daily that, mum's driving to drop off the kids, And that's the truth of it. Like, I think we've just modern cars have just become too good for their, like they've just become too high-tech and efficient for their own good. And as an enthusiast, you lose that, you know? And now we're getting to a period where there's going to be hybrid and electrification. And for that, I sort of think it's a bit sad that you're going to lose a bit. It's like cars even, like Lamborghini have just released their latest V12, which every 10 years they do this. And people are bemoaning the fact that it just doesn't sound as good as the old one. And it's true, they've actually put filters within the exhaust systems and that actually quieten them a lot down.
A lot of manufacturers
are
doing that now too, yeah.
Yeah, they have to, right, for regulation, and it's just antisocial, and the reality is the aftermarket can't even change that, because where they've actually put those filters and modified the cars and engineered them to be a certain way, putting a loud mufflers just won't work anymore. Like it'll just give you a lot of warning lights on your dashboard, and you have to go and get them cleared, and it's a really expensive exercise. So I just think there's a bit of magic lost with newer cars. They're just getting really, really almost robotic. And there's, like I said before, that not having a one-to-one feel. It's a bit of a wooden feel. I feel like I'm getting driven in a modern car. And don't get me wrong, as a daily, it's fantastic. I think, thank God, cars actually have gotten better, and even just for safety, right? Like, I even remember as a kid, like literally, there would be an accident at the corner almost every second weekend. And that's because people had drum brakes, they had no ABS, they had crappy tyres. I mean, the technology today really makes us look like really good drivers, you know, but back in the old days when you had no stability programs, no ABS, suspension systems are really agricultural. Those cars were literally just death traps, and people were getting killed, you know what I mean? And this is like 82, they actually introduced 0.05 in New South Wales, like alcohol. Before that, you just drive home blind drunk in a car. They would want to kill you on the best of days. Thank God for technology. But if you're an enthusiast in that, like on a Sunday morning, what gets me out of bed is literally firing up an old beast that smells and makes noise and is a bit antisocial, but makes you feel alive. It's like I'm driving something different, and it's something that could potentially kill me, right, on a good day. And there's an excitement about it, you know what I mean? And
beautiful Sunday morning cold start, hey?
Yeah.
Just that.
And it sounds a lot like it's kind of the romance doesn't die as quickly on those older cars, because, you know, a modern car, like I said, the power is instantaneous, the comfort is just there. You don't have to learn the car, or you can jump into almost any modern car and they're going to be somewhat similar. But then the love
actually raises your expectations. You actually get very intolerant when modern cars don't work.
Yeah. And you jump in, and I've heard you describe it as well, it's like, wow, it's like being in the cockpit of a plane, and it's almost like the sitting in it and the turning it on and the startup sounds that a lot of cars have is like, you've kind of like had half of the experience, then you drive it and now it's kind of over. Whereas with the modern cars, with the cars that you love, like my own restored cars, it's like, turn it on, let it warm up. It's like, it's
go
a
through
real
a sequence.
Journey. Yeah.
Go through a journey. Enjoy the process. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a video of a pretty popular Ferrari collector. He literally collects priceless Ferraris, 7-figure cars, and he has one video where the first 2 minutes of it is the whole process of him just starting it in the morning. The way he just primes the car's carburetors and honestly, it takes him about probably in real time 10 minutes just to get this thing going. You know what I mean? And I'll be honest with you have to be really into it at that point and patient. But the whole romance of doing it and just that motor spluttering to life, like you've made this happen, and that interaction is just magical.
It's like we said, coffee enthusiast, and I have the full setup, and the slow cold drip, and you know, grinding the beans themselves and buying a
capsule and get that in.
Yeah,
probably a better coffee.
Potentially, or at least a more consistent coffee.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the other thing too. Modern cars give you a more consistent, but it's not necessarily what you want here. And I guess, like any good relationship, old cars make you work for it a little bit.
Absolutely.
But the love lasts a bit longer.
I think it does.
Yeah.
Nah, you've hit it right on the head, Dean. I love that. I love that about the older cars, the magic of it. And it's almost like the excitement of like, I know this almost sounds crazy, but to a car guy, it's almost like, am I going to get home with this today? Like, you know what? Let's go out there and, you know, fortune favours the bold.
Yeah,
you know, and it's a bit of fun. A bit of a gamble. You take it out, and you know what? The more reliable it is, you go, yep, I've hit that magic spot. I've got that analog feel, that interactive feel, old school car, and I got myself home. It's been a good Sunday, right? Because many times I've had that call, or Diana's heard that truck, that beeping truck reversing up, and she goes, yeah, okay, it's broken down again. So, you know.
Had to get a lift
He
up.
goes, one day, yeah. Oh, I used to know all the towies for a while, like, you know, I'd be riding shotgun with them. No, it was really good. It's really been fantastic. I love the old cars, to be honest with you, even though as I get older, my patience is waning for them to a certain degree. Yeah.
Speaking of tow trucks, what have been your top 3 favorite cars and why?
Well, out of 60, I say 64 was the number, I think.
Yeah.
3 cars stand out. One that I've actually owned quite a long time. So the funny thing is, people always seem to go, what new car have you bought? And I don't have a history of keeping them a long time. Generally a year and a half, 2 years I top out. And that's a real long time. I've had one car for 19 years,
Right.
An old Falcon, an old blue Falcon that a lot of people know me for. I sort of bought that as just a bog stock standard V8 Falcon with some questionable modifications from like the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. I bought it just about 20 years ago actually, and I built that into a real nice GDHO spec car. And I had it for 10 years, and in a foolish moment I actually sold it. Lucky a great friend of mine got the car, kept it for 6 years, and then sold it back to me. So I've actually had it back for about 3.5 years. So overall I've had a 19-year love affair with this car, and I don't think it'll ever leave me. Everyone knows me for that car. My kids all laying claim for it. It's not the most valuable car out there. It's not the most valuable car I've owned or own, but there's something about it. It's got my life from when I was in my 20s, 30s, and now into my 40s. And I was just remarking with Diane the other night, my wife, how it saw us through 3 places that we moved, like 2 houses. And it's actually almost the only consistent thing I've had from when I was a kid. And I remember just being like, with that particular car, just being in the traffic, and someone pulled the window down and he just fell in love with it. And he goes, mate, what do you want for it? I said, no, you can't buy this, it's priceless. And he said, no. Like I said, mate, I'm sure you'll offer me more money than it's worth. I said, but they'll bury me in this. I said, I can't sell it, right? Ask me for anything else, but not this one, you know? Funnily enough, I probably would sell you anything else.
How often did you think about it in that time you didn't have it? Like,
I actually, so one of my best friends owned that car, probably my best friend actually, and he actually kindly offered it back to me because he always thought I should have had it back.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just a fantastic thing to do. He was quite generous in offering it back, way below its market value. I never thought of it so much that I missed it because he owned it. It was like my own brother or my own family owning, so I sort of felt, but when he actually came to a point, he goes, look, I'm going to move a few cars, I want to invest in some other stuff and buy property, I'm actually going to sell this, but I want you to have it. And at that point, it actually did bother me. It was like, oh, now I know where it is. So I didn't need it, I had cars at the time, and he offered it to me, and at the time, the last time I sold it, I actually went with my head, because I had a really collectible car that was almost the same. It was a really nice unrestored XY GT. It's probably worth 4 times the value of the car I had. And I thought, well, I'll keep this for longevity and value and collectability, and sold the car I'd built. But this time my wife said, you know what, the last time you sold that car was because you thought with your head. Now, I know it sounds really cliched and soppy, but she goes, just go with your heart. Like, do it because you really want. So I said, you know what, I never looked back. I bought the car, I've never looked back. And then it was only when I actually took it, I was excited again, like I'd seen it for the first time. And I actually got emotional about it because I was like, I can't believe I almost lost it, but it was like destiny that it was to come back. And now, regardless, I mean, I've been able to buy genuine cars and that, but that car's just always been in my heart. And it's like, I don't know, it's like your wife or your partner or someone that's just in your heart. It doesn't really matter. You're not gonna trade that. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what anyone says. So
and
so the other two, sorry, so I waffled on. The other two's much shorter, trust me, 19 years. So I bought an American car, bought a beautiful Boss Mustang 302 about 5 years ago. It was just when Daniel, my littlest, was born. And that was an experience because it was a left hook car. And driving left hand is actually really enjoyable. Well, some people find it quite awkward. I actually found that, then again, once again, the challenge and the interaction of going, if I overtake this car, am I going to have a head on? No, I didn't, right? Like, I literally survived that one. And in about a year and a half, I put 10,000 miles, which is like 17,000 kilometers in that car. And in a small act of insanity, I sold that car and almost instantly regretted as soon as I did it. I did try and track it down and buy it back. I haven't been successful.
how impulsive are your purchases and sales generally?
About the same, actually, about the same. I would literally sell a car and go, I usually start falling in love with something and start thinking about it until a point where it just grows and I go, nah, I want it, I grab it. Then I think, well, look, the practical economic reality is that something's got to go if you're going to buy something. Yeah. So then I go, well, which one's going to go? And I go, well, I've sort of fallen a little bit out of love with that. So then it goes, and I'm not one to wait around. So generally, if I can realise the opportunity, I pay the opportunity cost. So sometimes I've let cars go for a lot less than their value, but then I've been fortunate I've been able to jump on something that was undervalued at the same time. So it sort of ebbs and flows. It overall, I'd say I'm pretty even, but I really regret selling that Boss Mustang. It was a beautiful car. And I'd probably say the third car, I got a little blue Alfa Romeo, a little GTA, little 147. It's your typical Italian madness where they put a 250 horsepower car, V6, 250 horsepower engine into a little front wheel drive hatch with no limo, and it just screams and it tries to put you in the trees. And it's just typical Italian madness, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. And I bought that car, I've always wanted one. I finally bought one, and everyone thought it was a midlife crisis because it looks like a 20-year-old would be driving it, it's close to a 50-year-old. But it's got this most beautiful sounding engine that they don't make anymore. It's actually quite famous for its engine. It's a Busso V6, and that engine is just pure romance. And the funny thing is, it's my smallest car, it's my cheapest car, but the great thing is it's got 5 seats. So I've literally loaded the whole family, and I've driven it probably 4,000 or 5,000 Ks in the last 4 or 5 months, and I loved every kilometre of it. And being an Alfa Romeo, people think they break down. It's actually been quite reliable. I don't think I'll ever sell that car, to be honest with you. I think it's just magical, and it's not really worth much. Yeah. So it's not like the sort of car I go, well, it's a lot of money, and it's an inexpensive car. Pay $10,000 for it and spend a few thousand cleaning it up. And for $14,000 bang for your buck, it's probably my favourite car.
Yeah, I guess all collecting is the same because it's very similar in the watch community. Rarely is your most expensive watch your favourite watch for whatever reason, and I think that'd be true of almost anything. Yeah. How much does nostalgia or like your personal connection to the car influence your decision to pick up the next one versus sometimes you fall in love with the collecting itself and you kind of get into the little bit of habit of, I've never had that one before, I've never had that one, and I kind of want to fill out this like lifelong collection that I've had. I've never had a hot hatch, I've never had a left-hand drive vehicle, I've never, that versus the fulfilling the childhood dreams of like, I had 7 posters on my wall, and by the time I die, I want to watch each one of these cars.
I'm completely driven by emotion.
Yep.
So I could have one car or I could have a few. It's not driven by having to collect a certain thing. And I don't ever buy a car for what it might represent or look like. I just buy it because it's emotion. I mean, it's that crazy that I've got a funny story about this. I thought about why I do certain things, and a couple of years ago, because I've had a few when I was young. Like the car of my dreams was a WRX, ironically, and I was fortunate enough to have about 4 of them. And a couple of years ago, I was like, oh yeah, that's the stuff you had when you were a kid. I found this beautiful, really early, original, unrestored WRX that was on one of the auction sites online, a bit like eBay. And I looked and I thought, wow, this is really original condition. It's fantastic. I thought, I didn't even think about like looking for this model. I just looked at it, I just fell in love and said, wow, great. I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna throw a bid on it because I'm gonna put in a low enough bid that if it really wins at that, like it's gotta be worth that all day. Anyway, I put this bid on a Monday and forgot about it within 20 minutes. Literally 5 days later, I'm sitting with my family watching a movie and I get an alert on my phone. And it says, you're currently winning this bid. And I'm like, Diane goes, what is it? I go, I've got some spam. I don't know what this is, right? I go, someone's, this is, I don't know what this is. I've looked and I go, original unrestored 94 WRX could be yours. And I go, that sounds familiar, that sounds good. I was like 22nd Tom there, like I've clicked on this link and all of a sudden this red car and I go, I remember that. And I go, my God, I'm winning this auction. It's only got 5 minutes to go. And then I got really nervous because I was like,
no, I have to.
I go, what is? No, I didn't. I almost was like, surely someone's going. The bidding always comes late, and I put that bid really early. So either everyone's laughing at me, going, "This idiot just paid way too much for this car," or I'm going to get gazumped at the end. I was like, okay, oh, that was a that was a nice Monday thinking, like, you know, back at work, and I'm a little bit, it's like,
Monday Dave.
Friday Dave versus Monday Dave. And 10 minutes later, I had to break to Diane that we were the proud owners of a really original red, unrestored WRX. And I stood with Diane going, were you going to buy it? And they go, well, I've got no option. I said, I've won the auction. I said, I can't go back on it. I said, I'm sure it's got like a bad feedback rating or something. Like, I obviously made something up, and it was.
Did you lose on that car?
No, actually, I didn't. I actually didn't. I sort of broke even. I spent a little bit of money on it, just to clean up a few things, but overall, it was about even. I maybe made a couple $100, but I just remember I wasn't even. The next week, I was actually going away, and the car got delivered from Melbourne, so I had to get it trucked up. And I actually had to ask my brother because when it turned up, it's a manual and Diane's not good with driving stick. And I actually had to get him. I said, look, I know you haven't driven manual for a while. Can you make sure you... He said, it's okay, I'll be right. I said, just look after my baby. And then I called Diane. I was like, how bad is it? She goes, well, it's a bit tired. I love it. You know what I mean? I love it. I'm sure, you know, they say there's a statistic that you always feel better about after you've made a better purchase. You reaffirm that it's the right decision.
Yeah.
I actually loved that car. I couldn't get home. When I got home, honestly, it was like I'd just won a $500,000 supercar. I was like, this is fantastic. I tell the kids, strap in. Like, we were just going around the block, and it was making like smells and radiator and cool. I was like, well, okay, I've got to get this serviced. I had that car, so very much based.
It's so funny because people talk about, in this day and age, and my wife says this sometimes, you order so many packages off Amazon, sometimes you forget when they turn up, and a box, like back in the day, you'd order something 2-3 days later, 5 days later, it'd come in, but I've been looking forward to this thing, and you knew what was coming.
Yeah.
Now, the packages will just come to the door. It's like, what did I order, or when did I order this? And you open it up, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. But you just get cars that way.
Oh yeah.
So just cars just turn up. It's like,
To be fair, I haven't done anything that is just as impulsive as that. That's not very regular. Although I have been known at times to say to Diane, I said, look, I'm looking at that model, and then I've come home and she goes, have you bought it? And a lot of times I've said, yeah, I sort of have. So I'm going to say, for the record, I have a very understanding wife. She's
true.
very good. She doesn't nag me about stuff, and I think she's got the patience of a saint with me.
That's true.
Because sometimes I was like, really? Are you sure you're not that bothered? She goes, well, if you enjoy it. So I'm lucky that way, touch wood.
Something I just wanted to touch on was, I've noticed a lot of collectors have a blind loyalty to like a brand or even a specific model.
Yeah.
To the point of view where like a collector wouldn't even consider owning a Monaro if they were a Ford fan.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like a religion or like sport or something like that. You know, you don't seem to really have this. You have kind of a fairly unbiased admiration for many brands and sort of many models. Why is this? You spoke about the Alpha that you bought recently. You kind of mentioned why that car was so special, but you've owned Walkinshaws and you've owned Falcons.
Same time.
Yeah, at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that
the enemies
different to a lot of your friends you would have because you're part of collecting communities?
Yeah.
Is that unique to you, or would you say that's normal?
Look, there's a lot of clubs that are just one mark, so I've probably always considered myself really to be a Ford guy. My dad worked at Ford for so many years. I grew up with Ford, so I've got an affinity naturally to them, but I've never wanted to limit myself because car manufacturers make so many nice cars, and I just like sampling them all. I like trying them, and yeah. So the funny thing is, I've got a really good friend who's an avid car collector, and he's always one-eyed about Ford. But I actually sort of shown him the light, and he started driving some. He's like, I'll never get into a Holden. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather push my Ford than drive a Holden, the old shirts. And I remember one year, I think it was 2014. I had a really, funnily enough, they're quite rare and valuable now, but back at the time they weren't so much so. I had a VN Group A Commodore, and I remember when we were driving there, he was completely unimpressed until we went to the holy ground of racing. We went to Mount Panorama Bathurst, and he got into this VN Group A. And that was the last time I drove that car that weekend. He could not get out. He loved it. And he said, you know what, maybe you're onto something. And he's since like expanded his collection to all these other marques. He's still a Ford nut. But look, I'm part of car clubs that are actually a mix. And I like that. I like the variety. Sometimes when you have those one make shows and that, it's like, yeah, okay. After I see my sixth one, they sort of all start looking the same.
Yeah.
I just love, I love experiencing all cars. I love, the typical front engine, rear wheel drive. I love the hot hatches with front wheel drive. Mid engine cars are fantastic, probably the best handling cars, are great. Rear engine cars, I've loved them. I usually have a little bit of a route. I like going through for a drive sometimes to just decompress.
Yeah.
I sort of will go through the national forest. I'll go through the Nasho, as it's known, and go for a bit of a spirited drive.
Yeah.
I like to go usually during the day, and sometimes if I'm on leave or I've got a day off, do it in the middle of the day because it's quieter. And I just love just winding the car out and just being lost in my thoughts. Sometimes, most of the time, I don't even have the music on. It's just literally me. It's just me and the car. Just listen to the engine, and I get lost. And I find that quite therapeutic.
Yeah.
And so going back to it, I've experienced so many cars. It almost comes to the point where the family asks me, has it passed the Nasho test? Have you gone through it and enjoyed it? And how do you compare it to the?
I think so, like, why deprive yourself of 50% of the enjoyment because I can never drive a Holden, I can never drive, I can never drive this, or I can never drive.
People were pretty rusted on. It was like, Labour or Liberal, Ford or Holden. People had their sides, like a cultural thing, and people grew up in that. And so when you follow a footy club and, your brother, older brothers follow, it's like, well, I've got to follow that, or, the family did that, and it was a cultural thing.
Ownership cycles were longer too, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Back then, like, your family would own a car, and they would own a car for years, whereas
There wasn't,
from when you were born to like when you're 18,
then, right?
yeah, your family's owned 4 or 5 cars sometimes, but that wasn't like that, was it?
No. Well, my father's probably owned half a dozen cars in 53 years of driving, and in half the time I've owned 10 times that, you know what I mean? Which is craziness in itself. But my father views a car as really like white goods. It's like point A to B, and if it's quiet and it's efficient and it's got air conditioning, and that's fantastic. I still remember one day I was so proud. I brought home this really old collectible car, an unrestored car, so the paint was a bit iffy. Yeah. And it didn't have much rust though, but it looked like it'd been almost dragged out of the bottom of a river. And I was so proud of it. I was so lucky to get this car. And my father said, "What did you pay for this junk?" And I said, "It's not junk." He goes, I said, "Have a guess." He goes, "I don't know, 5,000, 10,000. The car was probably about 10 times that value and more. And after I told him, he said, "Son, you probably need to get yourself checked out." And he told me this in Italian. He goes, "You really should see someone." He goes, "I remember having a model like that, which was nothing like it. It was the base model." And he goes, "They broke an axle," and I gave to the first guy, offered me $100. He goes, "Here you are paying all this money for it." He goes, "I'm sure it's collectible." He goes, "The good thing is there's people that are as crazy as you that'll buy it off you." And I just that always stuck with me. That was about 15 years ago, and it's an old school way of thinking, right? Where migrants come into a new country, they don't think of cars as collectible, and it just served one purpose, And you're lucky to have one car in the whole family or 2 families. Well, now we're spoiled, right, in this day and age where you can have multiple cars and be just it's just a passion, really.
So, Dave, you recently bought a Hyundai Palisade through us at Motorist. And it was actually a comment that you made a few weeks after owning that car that made us want to sit down with you. That's the whole reason we're actually kind of here.
Yeah, right.
The comment you made was, "I think I get more excited about driving my Hyundai than my Ferrari." And if you ever told me that as a kid, I would have said you were absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Now, obviously that's a comment of comfort and, where you're at in your life and your enjoyment levels change and technology of the vehicle. But how much does your enjoyment of the Palisade have to do with the unexpected delight and quality that you're discovering that you maybe didn't think you could find in that car?
Yeah. So it was a bit of a throwaway comment, but funnily enough, there's actually probably a bit of truth to it, because from a practical, it's so comfortable in that. But actually, as a drive car, that's what I found unexpected. I actually really enjoyed driving our Palisade. So we got the Pally, nicknamed it Pally, like the kids love it. We got it some 8 months ago, obviously through Motorist, and there was a bit of a wait to get one, so we're pretty fortunate, obviously, dealing with you guys to get us the car and getting it in the options we want, and I think to date still the best price that we could actually ever get. Funny enough, I'm on a Hyundai Palisade group, and I still get people actually put quotes up, and then I'm actually almost embarrassed to say, and I say, well, try Motorist, and a few people actually have clicked on that. But I found one, obviously the buying experience was fantastic, so thanks guys for the car. It is Diane's car, so that's my wife's car, so she drives every day. But probably the way you can typify how good these cars are is that my wife literally drives as a chore. Like, you know, drops the kids to school, does the shopping, runs errands. So, no, she doesn't mind it.
Yeah.
She does enjoy going for drives if I'm driving in some of the cars we have. But for every day, she actually said to me soon after, she goes, I actually know why you actually enjoy going for drives. She goes, the Palisade is just so nice. I said, you know what? It is nice. It's like every car we've had before is a family car. We've taken it more because of the sake of convenience. But apart from all its features and that, it's actually got a beautiful feeling to it. Like, it's got a really nice creamy V6 engine. Like, yeah, we could have gone to diesel, and the diesels are fantastic too. I got to drive a diesel too when you organised the test drive with David there at North Shore, and I actually didn't mind. In fact, at first I didn't realise it was the diesel because they've just gone so many leaps and bounds like in technology that they don't sound like commercial vehicles or trucks anymore. They actually they're quite refined. But we ended up going for the petrol because Diane does a lot of short trips, and I was a bit concerned about if we were going to have issues with particle filters and that. So I thought, look, we don't drive and we only do like maybe 6,000 Ks a year. So we thought, well, the petrol and the offset of the cost isn't really much. But I just found that if you were to close your eyes and not look at the badge, you would think you're driving something that was literally twice the value or twice the price. Yeah. And funnily enough, sort of dreaming a little bit, Diane's favourite car's always been like a Macan or a Cayenne. Yeah. And I actually looked into them, and a Cayenne was like twice the price, and that was like a base model. It wasn't like a GTS or something. So that was like, hey, you just got in entry level. You know what I mean? Like, you're part of the club only just. And if I had to compare them, it's like there's no comparison. And you know, quite cynically in the past, I've always leaned to Japanese cars. So we had a Toyota RAV4, we had a Honda. Always thinking the quality's what.
It's a very Australian thing though, like the reverence for Japanese quality and reliability. Yeah. You know, you almost can't convince some people that there's a more reliable car than a Toyota, really.
One thing I found is I always used to think, I was quite simple about their warranties. And I was like 5-7 year warranties. I go, of course you need them because they're probably going to fall apart. But I've had Mercedes and BMWs, and they've got high quality leather and good feel and soft touch, and almost a year of ownership in the Palisade, and it still looks like it's new. It's like we got it yesterday.
But they're also using the right qualities now as well, aren't they? Like, you look at the Palisade, what you'd have, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's a Highlander, you'd have Napa leather.
Yeah.
So the quality of the leather is the same as what you're going to have in, you know, the $200,000 Porsche Cayenne as well. So they've come a long way, which is what I found. And we sat in one together.
Wow, yeah.
And I was thrown back because put my hand up, I'm one of the biggest car snobs you're ever going to come across, right? If it hasn't got the 4 rings, pretty much rule me out.
Yeah.
But I sat in this thing, and for once in my life, I sat there going, well, why would you go spend an extra $60,000 on a prestige brand? I don't want to name any brands. Why would you spend $60,000 more when you can sit in one of these things and it has everything? Like, you can recline your seat back in the second row. Yeah, like, you're sitting there, and heated seats. I was thrown off.
We said that recently. You know, what more could you get in the car, or how much higher quality can you actually go than this, really? And and Honda's really stepped that up.
And I think where the value component is that if you've got a $150,000 grocery getter SUV, you're going to be quite particular about how it's treated, right? But the funny thing is, you would think, oh, well, you spent half the money, like, it doesn't matter. Literally have the kids make sure their shoes aren't dirty getting in it. Yeah. You know, Diane, even when she places her shopping, she won't slide it across the back cargo area and scratch the metal, because we just appreciate how well finished it is. Yeah. And it's just a beautiful car. Like, it's actually something that, even at that price, if you told me 10 years ago I'd spend that sort of money on a Hyundai, I'd look at you like as if you've lost your marbles, right? Now I look at it and I go, the badge belies its value. I actually think it's actually almost undervalued. It's just an amazing car. We've loved it. Some of the features that it has, like the heated steering wheel, and it's even got like a little inbuilt horn, like the honking behind you. As soon as a car in front of you moves, it beeps and says the car's moved. So wake up, move. You know.
Yeah, get up, it's like just one step below autopilot, really.
Well, actually, in saying that, it's got adaptive cruise, but it also has the lane assisting. Yeah. So a couple of times I've said to the kids, look, no hands, but it obviously warns you, put your hand back on the wheel. But the car was literally for a while just driving itself. Yeah. And I just found that, like, this is just getting to the Jetsons sort of era of space technology.
better appreciation of it than most, because most people kind of gradually, they upgrade every 4 or 5 years, and you know, a few more features. Oh, now there's Bluetooth, now there's heated seats, now there's cooled seats. It's gradual. Whereas you just go like 50-year jumps, and from a 1970s car to a 2023 car, and you're like, wow, look at this. Yeah.
One car's almost trying to kill me, and another car that's actually wanting to make my dinner.
You couldn't.
It's amazing, right? It really is.
Can I ask you said something super interesting that I haven't come across before, but I'd love to ask. You said that a longer warranty was actually a put-off for you, which I find so odd, and I don't know about you, Seb, but I find, like for me personally, and I think for a lot of the customers that we help every day buying cars, it's kind of, I mean, the logic would almost tell you that it's, you know, the longer warranty is like the last barrier. It's like, okay, like you were gonna jump, you were gonna try this brand, but how could you go wrong? Now it's 7 years, you can't go wrong. But I'm interested in going into like that.
So in the early days, I was actually quite cynical.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think they were well built.
Yeah.
I thought the fact that the only way they could get to sell them was by putting a really long warranty. Like that. You know, I remember back when new cars only had 12-month warranty or 20,000 Ks. That's it, right? Honestly, that's the standard warranty that was statutory, and that's all you get. Sometimes Toyota or Honda would give you 2 years, 40,000. Subaru actually one of the first had 3 years and unlimited, which was like, wow. And you actually were impressed because you go, oh, because Subarus were really well built and known for longevity. Yeah. So when you had those new era of Hyundais and Kias, and you had Daewoo's back then, I remember, if you remember that brand, and you had these brands that was sort of, you know, not Japanese for me, and I was like, okay, they're just emerging brands, new to the Australian market, and they came out with like 4-year, 5-year, 7-year warranties. Instinctively, I thought, well, that's the only way you're going to sell them, that people will go, well, if something goes wrong, at least they're going to fix it. Yeah. So I always thought of it quite cynically in the way that the reason they got high warranties is because they're not good quality. No, so and I always thought, well, they're disposable after that point. So after actually it runs out 7 years, that's the time you send it on, and that's it, you're done.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the next step is going to be lifetime warranty, because I know that, you know, you're getting to 10-year warranty now on some models. It's like, how much longer is it ever going to last? I think what they'll do is lifetime warranty for first owner. Makes sense. So it's like, you know, if you're going to run this for 15 years, great. How many people really going to run a car past 7, 8 years? Really?
Well, my father will prove that one wrong, but anyway.
Mine too.
You've clearly owned plenty of cars, but what's your favorite car you haven't owned?
I think I alluded to it before. Favorite car that I haven't owned? Well, if I was dreaming, probably a Ferrari 246 I love them. Same, probably more potentially attainable if I got really lucky. I'd love a Lamborghini Aventador. I love them because they're the last sort of aspirated V12s. And I know, as a kid, I remember growing up with Cannonball Run and just watching a Lamborghini Countach outrun the police, and it's just something that, to this day, still etched in my mind. And so there's something really exotic about a Lamborghini, and I always thought, you know, it would be great to have scissor doors and a V12, and they're just so exotic. So an Aventador would probably be there, and they just discontinued, as I was just saying before, they've created a new model, which is every 10 years they come up with a new V12 model, and they don't even sound the same. And to be honest with you, looking at them, I just think they've gone too far. And this is the problem. Classic, like, car manufacturers, designs were simpler, so they were more timeless. They actually aged better. Nowadays, cars date very quickly because they're so into the current trend that you can almost say, okay, that's a 2015 model, that's a 2010 era car, that's a 2020 era car, because it's all, manufacturers almost came to a point where they have to almost outdo the competition and have the latest, more modern, high-tech thing. And I think a lot of classic car design has been lost in that, where it's just too much. And there's that old adage that sometimes less is more. Yeah. And I think in that case, it absolutely is true, where a classic design, smooth, round curves, uninterrupted, planar designs actually stand the test of time. Yeah. When newer cars with all their scoops and flares, and it's just too much. They're too fussy. They're trying almost too hard. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's fantastic. You look like a jet pilot car, but we all know that you'd probably top out at 150, and yeah, you're just a modest car underneath all of that, right? Yeah. But you look like something super duper. So I think that's been a bit lost. That's why, for me, the Aventador is probably the last real awesome looking supercar. Or a Dino, if I ever get my hands on it, but I don't think the old fella's going to be selling any soon. I think since I had that was 8-9 years ago, I think they've probably not doubled, but probably gone up another 30%. So they're absolutely, clearly unattainable for me. But you never know. Never know in life.
I guess, I mean, a great way to round this off is, you've spoken about your journey of collecting and, the past. How do you think car collecting will change and evolve over the next 30 years? And I ask that because, a lot of people make the comment, you've even alluded to it yourself in this conversation, that, a car built today may never hit the heights of, collectability or popularity as, say, 1960s Mustang or something like that. And it seems that the sentiment comes from the fact, like you said, that an old car built out of proper metal just has a greater intrinsic value. But we spoke about nostalgia earlier, and in a world where a Pokemon trading card can be sold for $5 million,
Wow.
is it that unrealistic to believe that something like a first-gen Tesla might be a collectible one day?
Yeah, probably have to disagree on the electric stuff because it's just emerging, so there's going to be a lot of it. But I think there's a lot of talk, so I'm in a lot of online forums and groups, and I follow chats and threads. Like in America, for example, they're talking about their forever ICE car, their internal combustion engine car. So people are already planning that with electrification and hybrid, because there's a lot of regulation around the world with, and quite rightfully so. Even as a die-hard car enthusiast, I think something has to be done with all the carbon dioxide that gets blown into the air. So cars inherently, coal, fossil fuel burning cars are... Well, that one's for the books.
Is that the cop car?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Bloopers.
It is actually. So I think fossil fuel burning cars obviously have got their end life. So people are starting to think of what's a car that collects? What's a car that on a Sunday morning I want to hear the start of an engine? Because let's face it, with electrification, they're all going to be silent. It's all going to be very quiet, efficient cars. So I think there will be a little bit of nostalgia there almost immediately. People are already starting to try and jump on the last of the internal combustion engine cars. If you look at some of the manufacturers over in the US, muscle car, they've already discontinued petrol engine cars. They're already going to electrification. Ford is probably one of the last standing. They've planned up the Mustang until the end of the decade. But after that, you'd have to think it's going to go electric also. Yeah. They've already got the Mustang Mach-E. Yeah. So I think future-wise, I think they'll be coveted. Also think, for example, even now, like manual transmission cars. So I have a absolute fondness. All my cars are pretty much of 99% of manual transmission cars. That's been gone by the wayside. So Lamborghini and Ferrari haven't built a manual transmission car for about, at least I'd say 10.
Even just the gear stick's gone in an auto. Like I noticed that when I jumped in it, your Palisade, there's just 3 buttons, and they put it in a row, I think, to replicate. It's normal to have these in a row, but really it could be anywhere. It could be on the dash next to the aircon.
Can I ask, is that more to do with the fact that there's not enough people, especially for Ferrari and Lamborghini? Is it a demand factor, or is it just because the engine can't keep up with the power? Because I know Mercedes has that problem with the engine being too powerful for the clutch. So they abandoned the manuals because they couldn't keep up with it.
There's an element of that. So Kama have sometimes phased out cars because it's not economical for them to have a manual transmission because they get more warranty claims. But generally, if you think about the sort of target market for high-end supercars and the price tags they have, you'll find they're older, wealthy owners, and they generally don't want to be shifting gear shifts. Now, there's some that would, but the vast majority want the convenience. And also, performance-wise, a double clutch shifting, DCT shifting, or E-gear, or whatever you want to call it, like the paddle shift cars, they're much faster. Like you can never shift a car as fast as you can get through. And in fact, that's where you go again to that dilution of the experience, right? Where you're saying it's a bit sort of like
mechanical versus quartz watches.
Exactly,
Yeah.
it's almost robotic, and it's like, and you always have that age-old argument. People go, oh, but my car will shift this fast on the track. I can keep two hands on the wheel and keep changing gears. And I go, look, that's all fantastic, but let's face it, we're not all Schumacher or Fangio. So the reality is, you go out there for a run, and some people just want to shift their own gears. I want to use all four limbs when I drive the car, right? So that's it. Like, you know, I've got my foot on the accelerator or brake, one on the clutch, one on the wheel, and one on the gear shift, and it's completely interactive.
Yeah.
And that's, I enjoy that more so than, I know the car with a paddle shift would be faster. I just don't enjoy driving it as much.
It's fair to say though, it's kind of a very personal. There's almost a very personal end point for when the peak hits. It's almost like music. You know, they say people, the music that, you know, you hear from 15 to 18 is always your peak era, and no one will ever convince you otherwise. Is there a similar thing with collecting in general and in cars, where someone might say, okay, beyond the 70s, they just went to too much plastic, or beyond the 90s, like, you know, there was still Commodores and Falcons, and then when those, you know, sedans and saloons started being phased out, everyone's just in an SUV now. That's when it was too much, and then the next generation will be like, oh no, an electric car is great, but a flying car is too much. And
I think you're right. I think, first of all, personally, you'd be nostalgic, and you have fonder memories for stuff that, when, you know, age always sort of sweetens the memories, right, of how great things were. But back in the day, you're probably cursing. You know, you still get like the older folk that look at an old car and go, oh, I remember how many times I was stuck on the side of the road and it was overheating in the summer and all that stuff. When, you know, when you think about it, they were used daily, while now they're just maybe once a month or a Sunday drive for a novelty. But I do feel that probably the early 2000s, I think, was peak, and it was because cars got to a point where they were modern enough to be reliable, but they were still analog to have a real driving feel. And more people are starting to realise that. More people are starting to realise that sort of 90s to almost the late, like the start of the teens, so 1990 to 2010. It's like you get some really good performance cars that had enough tech that you could live with. Yeah. They were reliable enough, but they weren't computer screens and video games to drive, you know what I mean? Where you're like, you know, you're an arcade, which is today, you know? And I think that is the peak for me in regards to most cars. I mean, there's some ghastly looking cars of that era, designs, but when you think about top end cars like supercars and that, they were perfect. They were just reliable, but they were still analog enough that they had a connection to yesteryear, but you could still drive it to work in an emergency or as a daily to do something, because, you know, you didn't have to prime the carburetors for 20 minutes like an old 50s or 60s Ferrari or something like that. So for me, I think that era is great. Muscle cars, I'd probably still think the 70s, 60s and 70s absolutely peaked until they started with pollution gear, and, you know, there was emissions and going from leaded to unleaded, which was always going to happen. I think that's what killed that off. They were really inefficient motors. But the 60s were like crazy. Like, I always thought I was born in the wrong era. That would have been fantastic to live having muscle cars, but, you know, a lot of people didn't get through, right? Some people didn't live through it because it was just too much of a good thing.
That era you're talking about, with like that 90s turn the early 2000s, like that era spans, or that car scale goes from high-end supercars all the way down to like a 1994 model Honda Civic. Like, the cars were so perfect from that driver engagement point that you could be in a $10,000 car, or you could be in a $200,000 supercar, and you had that engagement. You didn't need to go and spend $200,000 to have that thrill, which was like, that's that era that, you know, I grew up in, with that ambition around cars and fun, and that's where that excitement came from. Where at 16 years old, when you got your license, $5,000 Honda Civic with a nice little engine in it was accessible to me. So you buy it, and this car was amazing. And what I found is that I kept chasing that tail to find that enjoyment, even till today. That enjoyment that I got from that first car, and the sense of driving around my P plates for the first day, I'm still chasing that.
You'll never get that.
Never get it. You never get it.
You can't. But you said something that was really good, because in the 70s and 80s, cheaper cars were really bad. They actually weren't great. While in that era of the 90s, and so you could actually have a cheaper car that actually could be fun to use. And nowadays, I mean, we're talking about, I think it was the Hyundai, it was at the N or i30.
i30N.
N. Like, I see a lot of them on the road, and I look at them and I go, I wouldn't mind that just as just a little.
FYI,
fun
it comes
car,
in
yeah.
manual as well.
Yeah. No, well, actually, to be honest, I'm getting that era where I'm actually starting to like battles. To be honest, ironically, for all I said, just to wipe everything I said in the last 10 minutes, I'm getting to the point where I think the next car I'd like is something I could probably drive daily, but at the same time have a bit of fun. And you know, I drive into the city for work, and you know, bumper to bumper traffic. You don't want to be clutching in. It's frustrating, you know, and also it removes it from your weekend drive because it's like, well, I can't really look forward to it on a Sunday when I just did this all week. Like, who cares? You know?
That's true.
We'll wrap up here. What was your first car?
It was a 1987 VL Commodore in what my brother described as 90-day beige because I got it at a good price. And he said, I said, oh, what colour's that? Him being facetious, I said, oh, it's sandalwood. It's called 90-day beige in the car industry. I go, what does that mean? Because it takes 3 months to move those things. And he goes, I bet you got it at a good price. He couldn't have been, he hit the nail right on the head.
What was your first car, Seb?
A 1994 model Honda Civic.
1990. Mine was a 1996 wide body Camry.
I remember it.
Which I was happy because it was gunmetal grey. That and it had the sagging roof. It was held up with thumbtacks, so it looked like a belly dancing room. It was just, yeah.
God, I tell you, talk about putting a positive spin on something like that. I've never thought about like because those roof linings of that era, they all sagged.
Yeah, it was
once the glue, like the heat of the Australian sun, it just disintegrates. And you used to get a lot. I had a Commodore actually like that. They had staples and that, and so yeah, that's great.
That's awesome. Look, thanks so much for chatting to us. We're 100% going to catch up again soon because I feel like in 6 months we're going to get to hear about a whole new bunch of cars that you've added to your collection.
Very, very likely, and the old fleet's gone.
Exactly.
You know, it's a changeover of the fleet.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for the night. It's been good. I like talking about this sort of stuff because it's my passion.